We're going to end with a new segment called Under the Radar. And basically, everyone gets to pick a story that people aren't talking about enough and talk about it. It's that simple. We're going to go really quick, and all four of you will bring up a story, and then we'll see what happens.
So I would just the Oklahoma teacher strike. I thought that basically there's been a decade of state tax cuts. There's been a 20% cut in public schools, a 4-day work week. Their teachers' salaries ranked 49th in the country. Teachers haven't gotten a raise in 10 years. And I think it's really important what's happening. But so what we've seen in West Virginia, what we're seeing in Kentucky and Oklahoma, it's not just about the specific policy about not paying teachers enough. It is the end results of a concerted effort of a theory. It's what's been happening in Kansas, Oklahoma, West Virginia, a bunch of states with Republican-controlled legislatures that says we cut taxes and we'll make up the difference with growth. We'll attract businesses, and that will help us later, in some distant future, close this financial gap. And it just has not happened. And it's fallen on the back of teachers, and the cut taxes, never raise taxes philosophy is sort of reaching its logical conclusion. And I think it's really important. And I think it's important, too, that it's happening in very red states, because it's a reminder that the idea that these are permanently red states is a fantasy. It's made up. Things change faster than we realize. These are people who can be reached. That's all.
Tommy.
I would like to talk about Syria. What I think is frustrating about the whole situation is that the story has sort of fallen off. And there was a period of time where this would be the most important thing that we talked about all the time, because the reality is we have 2,000 service members in Syria right now. Their mission is totally ill-defined. We don't know if they're doing training. We don't know if they're doing counterterrorism. We don't know if our policy is to just take out bad guys, or if it's to topple Assad and lead to a new government. Meanwhile, the humanitarian situation in Syria is like the worst thing you could ever possibly imagine. People are being tortured and killed. And there's a situation where 5 million some odd people have left and just sort of dispersed throughout Europe and the country. And so I reached out to a whole bunch of smart people I know, and they also shared my level of ambivalence, and they're not sure what the right answer is. And I just wanted to be, honest about that and not offer some hot take that everything he does is wrong, but also it just sort of speaks to a point about Donald Trump that is a through line through everything he does, which is that you know that there was no deliberation or consideration about this choice. He just walked into a room full of generals like he did on the campaign and said, fuck you, I know more about ISIS than you, we're getting out. Nothing he does is in good faith. Nothing, it's not about people in Syria. It's not about protecting the servicemen and women. It's apparently about feeling like we're getting ripped off and the Saudis should be paying for it. So I raise all of this verbal diarrhea as a way of saying I care deeply about what happens there. It's a situation and a policy choice made by Obama that's going to be with me and anyone else who worked on this for as long as we live. I wish we weren't talking about Stormy Daniels in the news. I wish we were talking about this stuff again, because we owe it to the guys fighting, we owe it to the people dying to give a shit.
Here's something we're not talking about enough. There is an election in Arizona in 2 weeks. So we have a special election in Arizona in the 8th district. And this is because, as is sort of per usual these days, a Republican member of Congress resigned for allegation of sexual misconduct. And so now we have to replace them once again, just like we did in Pennsylvania 18 a few weeks ago. Now, this is one, no one is paying attention to this, I think, in part because Trump has made a strategic decision to back off, because he's been burned like a half dozen times now by campaigning in special elections and losing. And the Democrats in Washington are frankly a little cautious about it, because, so the Pennsylvania 18 election that Conor Lamb won a few weeks ago was a district that Trump won by 20 points. The Arizona 8 is also a district that Trump won by 20 points, and so they're basically the same. But there's a big difference. This is actually a much more difficult district for Democrats, because there were technically, there were slightly more Democrats than Republicans in that Pennsylvania district. There are 80,000 more Republicans than Democrats in this Arizona district. But, so a lot of people in Washington will tell you they know what's going to happen, but no one has a clue. And there's been no polling done, no media polls have been done, and we have a great candidate who's running that race, an emergency room physician named Dr. Hiral Tempernini, who is running against a Republican state senator who is a Trumpist and has pledged to work with Trump to make America great again. And so there are a couple things I would say about that if you're interested in looking for a way to help, to make phone calls or donate, this is a place where you can dedicate some of your energy between now and the very important election we have in the fall. But what we have to do is run a real race there. And because if you run hard in districts and lose, what you are doing is, you may not send someone to Congress on election day, but you are building the organization and infrastructure that will help. And what is coming for Democrats, if we are going to continue, if we are going to get the White House back, is we're going to have to start turning states like Arizona, if not blue, purple. And so running a hard campaign in this race will mean that in 2020, when our Democratic nominee is trying to turn Arizona blue, we'll be making progress there. And even more immediate than that is we have a very important Senate race in Arizona. So testing out, building a volunteer network, building a donor network in that state will help there. And so we don't know what's going to happen. If you can help, please help. And I think it's also a lesson for Democrats to run hard in every one of these races so that because we don't know where we're going to win. If you had asked us months ago whether Conor Lamb had a chance, we would have said no. Yeah. And he won. And so we have another opportunity here, and I hope people engage in it and pay attention to it. And don't get disheartened if we lose. And Trump will tweet something about it to say, oh, this proves, I don't know, something. And but we will have done the right thing if we run a hard, well-organized race there.
Yeah.
Talk to Parkland students. You're here tonight. You care enough. We're pretty young. You know, look at our faces. Not a lot of creases. People are looking good. But there's thank you. There's a whole other generation that has picked up the mantle and is not waiting. They're sprinting for it. So that makes me incredibly hopeful, despite Donald Trump and all the frustration that we're dealing with every day. Things have been worse in this country before. Research the year 1968 and all the horrific things that happened that year. You know, a lot of people came before us have dealt with a lot worse, especially people of color in this country. So that makes me hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, after Donald Trump was elected president, this could have gone two ways. You could have had a bunch of people who were scared and cynical about politics and said, this is such a shit show, this is so awful that this happened, that I never want to participate in politics again. I don't want to pay attention to what's happening. I don't want to read the news. I just want to retreat into my house and live my own life. That didn't happen. And between what we saw with whether it's people flooding airports to protest the Muslim ban, whether it's, people, the largest turnout in history at the Women's March, whether it's the largest turnout you ever could have imagined in the March for Our Lives. And by the way, it's not just people turning out and protesting, it's people going to the polls and actually voting, and which is why we won all these elections so far. And that's what makes me hopeful. I mean, walking around the March for Our Lives and seeing people not just there to protest and hold up signs, but people registering to vote and people signing up for phone banks and knocking on doors. Like, people are engaged and they're ready. And like Dan was saying about the special election in Arizona, we're not going to win every fight, but we're starting to win fights, and people seem committed to fight in the long term here. That this is not just like a phase that people are going through. That all the people that we're talking to, they're in it for the long haul, and that makes me hopeful.
And I'll only add to that. I find myself motivated by an unremitting and bottomless well of fury. A feeling in politics I've never had my entire life, and I sincerely think it could power a city. So, so there's that too. That the fury is there, the hope and the fury.
I mean, I'll throw in more women than ever are running for office, which is not only inspiring, but you're seeing people who traditionally haven't. People who don't have a background in politics, people who didn't go to college thinking they would, study political science and then go on to a career in politics, but they're motivated by the fact that they can change things in their own neighborhoods. They can change things, and I hope that there are people in this audience that feel the same way. But it feels like the local seems more important than ever.
Yeah.
And that is exciting because usually, I mean, if you're from a small place, you feel like you're not represented at all in the discourse in terms of politics, and now every fight is your fight. So.
That's great.